It's 1783. The war is over. America has won its freedom. And in a quiet room, a group of officers waits for one man to make a choice that will decide everything. They want him to become king. He has the army. He has the loyalty of his men. He has more raw power than any human being in America has ever held. What he does next will decide whether the United States becomes just another monarchy or something the world has never seen before. This is the story of the man who said no. Here's what most people get wrong about George Washington. They imagine him as a marble statue, born important, born destined for greatness. He wasn't. He was born in 1732 on a modest Virginia farm, the son of a moderately successful planter who died when George was just 11 years old. No inheritance of real wealth, no elite English education like his older half-brothers received, no guarantee of anything. What he did have was ambition. Sharp, restless, almost uncomfortable ambition. The kind that made him volunteer at just 21 years old for one of the most dangerous jobs in the colonies. The British government needed someone to deliver a message deep into contested territory. French forces, hostile terrain, winter conditions that killed experienced soldiers. They sent a 21-year-old with almost no military experience. He nearly died twice, and somehow he survived and came back with a reputation. This wasn't luck. This was the first evidence of a pattern that would define his entire life. Washington had a strange, almost unsettling habit of walking away from disasters that killed other men. Now here's where the story gets uncomfortable, because if you judged Washington purely by his win-loss record as a general, he'd look like a failure. New York, 1776. Washington loses, badly. His army is nearly trapped and destroyed by British forces on Long Island. He escapes only through a fog-covered nighttime retreat that could easily have gone wrong. Then Fort Washington falls, then White Plains. The Continental Army isn't just losing battles, it's disintegrating. Soldiers are deserting by the hundreds, enlistments are expiring. Congress is losing faith. By December 1776, most rational observers think the American Revolution is finished. This is the moment that decides everything, and Washington makes a decision that historians still argue about today. On a freezing Christmas night, with an army that's barely holding together, Washington crosses the Delaware River. It should have failed. The weather alone should have stopped it. Boats were nearly overturned. Men were freezing. The timeline was already hours behind schedule. If this attack fails, there may not be another chance. The army might simply cease to exist by spring. They hit Trenton at dawn. The surprise is total. Nearly 1,000 enemy soldiers captured, barely any American casualties. It wasn't the battle that saved the revolution. It was what the battle proved, that this war wasn't over, and that this general, despite every previous failure, refused to quit. Here's the deeper truth that most retellings skip past. Washington's greatest battle wasn't against the British, it was against his own side. At Valley Forge during the brutal winter of 1777 to 1778, roughly 2,000 of his soldiers died, not in combat, but from disease, starvation, and exposure. Congress, chronically underfunded and divided, struggled to supply even basic food and clothing. And quietly in the background, a group of officers and politicians began questioning whether Washington was even the right man to lead the army at all. Historians call it the Conway Cabal, a shadowy, half-organized effort to potentially replace him. Washington almost certainly knew about it, and he did something that reveals more about his character than any battlefield victory. He didn't purge his enemies, he didn't lash out. He simply kept working, kept writing letters, kept holding the army together through sheer stubborn will, until the plotting collapsed under its own weight. This is the pattern again. Washington's greatest weapon wasn't brilliance on the battlefield. It was an almost superhuman capacity for endurance, the ability to survive being doubted, undersupplied, and outmaneuvered, and simply refuse to break. Which brings us back to where we started. 1783. The war is over. And now, the real danger begins. An anonymous letter circulates among Washington's officers at Newburgh, New York, unpaid, frustrated, and increasingly radicalized. The letter hints at a coup. Some officers are ready to march on Congress. Others still want Washington to simply seize power outright and become the ruler this new nation desperately needs, in their eyes, to survive. Every other revolution in human history, up to this point, ends this way. A general wins the war, the general takes the throne, power replaces power. Washington walks into the room where his officers are gathered. He pulls out a pair of glasses, something almost none of them have ever seen him wear in public. He tells them quietly that he's given not just his youth, but his eyesight in service to his country. The room falls silent. Grown men, hardened soldiers, begin to weep. The coup dissolves on the spot. And then, months later, Washington does something almost no victorious general in history had ever done. He resigns his commission, voluntarily. He hands his power back to Congress and rides home to his farm. When King George III of Britain heard what Washington had done, he reportedly said that if it were true, Washington would be the greatest man in the world. You'd think that would be the end of the story. It isn't. 6 years later, the country he helped build is falling apart under a weak, ineffective government. Washington is pulled out of retirement, again, to become the first president of the United States. He could have stayed in power for life. No law prevented it. No political tradition existed to stop him. Some genuinely wanted him to be a king in everything but a name. After 2 terms, Washington does it again. He walks away. He sets a precedent that would hold, unbroken, for nearly a century and a half. 2 terms and no more. Not because he was forced to, because he chose to prove that this country would survive without him. Washington wasn't the most brilliant general in history. He lost more battles than he won. He wasn't the most eloquent writer among the founders, or the sharpest political mind. But he had something rarer than genius. He had restraint, at the exact moment in history when restraint was hardest and rarest to find. In a century full of men who took power, Washington's greatest legacy might be the power he chose again and again to give away. If you found this story compelling, subscribe for more deep dives into the people who shaped history.